So, you want to make a Game Boy Advance game in under an hour. Now, I'm going to be making this video for people who are interested in game design, might even have a little bit of Unity under their belts, but are completely out of their depths when it comes to Game Boy Advance or other retro development. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment below, and I will get to it as soon as I can. Additionally, there is a Discord server in the description of this video. I'm on the server, many other notable Game Boy Advance developers are on the server as well, and we would be happy to walk you through any issue you might have. Two things to keep in mind. One, when it comes to open source development, there are a million alternatives for just about everything. So the way that I'm describing how to make a Game Boy Advance game will be different for everyone, most likely. And it will not be exactly the same as what somebody else might recommend. That doesn't mean that I'm right or they're right. All it means is that you have options. This particular workflow I found to be the fastest for just getting started. But yeah, just keep in mind there are options. And then secondly, you are going to want to become very familiar with a handful of technologies. First off, you want to know C and C++. I understand that with Unity, C# is the default language. Some game engines use Lua or JavaScript. The Game Boy Advance is much less powerful than your computer, and many other consoles from over 15 years ago are going to be even less powerful. People often equate the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy Advance, but the Super Nintendo is significantly underpowered in some aspects. So don't expect to be able to use a lot of the niceties that modern game engines will allow. You're going to have to get into the nitty-gritty and be comfortable using low-level languages. Don't even think about doing something like rendering 3D graphics without using assembly code. And this isn't meant to turn you away. I would go so far to say that the C and the C++ that you use when you're developing for a console like Game Boy Advance is incredibly straightforward. In fact, I would argue that it's a lot easier, at least for me, to jump into than it even was to jump into something like Lua when I wanted to use the Love framework a little while ago. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. Additionally, even if you're using Windows, and this tutorial will be on Windows, you are going to want to become comfortable with the Linux terminal. There are a few reasons for this, one of which is Windows was primarily designed for consumers, while Linux was made by programming hobbyists for programming hobbyists. So everything regarding programming is significantly easier to do on Linux. And as I'm walking you through some of these steps, you will come to see why. So the first thing that I'll have you do is install WSL, which is a Windows feature that allows you to use a Linux distribution on Windows. And I know this step is a little controversial. Some people love this and some people are opposed to it. But I have found that if you want to be developing long-term, or even if you want to be able to work on multiple projects, it is significantly easier to go this route than it is to do anything else. So that will be the first thing that we do. Now, I already have WSL installed, but I will be walking you through what I did to install it, and it should be just about the same for you. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to open your Start menu and go to PowerShell. It's going to open my other monitor. I'm just going to drag it back. You'll see this window is equivalent to this window, so I'll just close this. You're going to want to type in the command wsl.exe -- install. Now, it's already installed on my system, but this should walk you through the process of installing it on your system. Now, it is going to ask you to reboot, so go ahead and do that. And one thing you want to do while you're rebooting. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you visuals for this because it's different for every BIOS, every processor, but you might have hardware virtualization turned off. So when you see your BIOS screen, that's the screen that comes on when you turn on your machine for the first time. Usually it has the name of your computer or laptop manufacturer, like Dell, Asus. You're going to want to go into your BIOS settings. And that could be something that you access by pressing the delete key, the F2 key, the F12 key. It's a little different for every machine. It'll usually tell you on the screen which button to push, and if you don't know, you can easily Google this. Once you've gone into your BIOS settings, what you will want to do is search for a setting that says something like virtualization, CPU virtualization, hardware virtualization. It might be under your main or general menus, or it could be off in a submenu named CPU. You search around for a little bit, make sure that this is toggled on. If you do not see this setting, you are probably good. You probably don't need to worry about it. But if you do see it, you will want to turn it on. And then once you have saved your settings and Windows is done booting up, you will then have WSL installed. So now what you want to do is you'll want to install a Linux distribution on top of it. Now, the most popular is Ubuntu, and I have that one installed. You can go to the Microsoft Store. You just type in store and it comes right up. Might also be pinned to your taskbar automatically. You'll want to type in either Debian or Ubuntu. Now, Ubuntu as a distribution is based on Debian, and for our purposes, they are functionally identical. So it doesn't matter which one you choose. I'm going to go with Debian. Now, it's a pretty large download. I mean, it's like 300-400 megabytes, and my internet where I live is really slow. So I went ahead and pre-downloaded it. But once it's already downloaded, you'll see an open button. You'll just click that, and it will open a window like this. I already have a window over here. So I close the other one. Anyway, you will arrive at not a screen like this immediately. It will actually ask you to enter in a user and password. You will want to remember this username and password. That password is very important. The first thing you'll want to do once you're here is you want to type in sudo. This indicates that you are doing something under the administrator account, the super user account. Sudo apt. Apt is... So Linux doesn't install programs like Windows does. It has something called package repositories, which are something like an app store for programs. So it's really easy to install new programs with a single line in the command line. This is one of the many reasons why programmers love using Linux. So sudo apt update. This tells the system that it's you need to update the links to the most recent copies of every binary that's currently available for the system. So this tells it where to look. So sudo apt update, semicolon indicates that I am typing in multiple commands on one line. Sudo apt install. You're going to want it to install Git and Python. Just off the top of my head, these are ones that you will need later on. Git is a system that allows you to install or clone local copies of software online. It obviously does a lot more than that, but that's what we'll be using it for in this case. And then Python is a programming language that is often used in Windows as well, but in Linux as a sort of bash script system because of how versatile it is. In fact, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that macOS X uses Python to help build its user interface. So once you have these two commands, you'll be prompted for your password. You'll want to remember that password because if you forget it, you might have to uninstall your Ubuntu or Debian instance and then reinstall it. I'll want to say yes to this, and that'll go ahead and install those pieces of software. Now, there are lots of different ways to get GBA code compiled into a GBA binary. I will be introducing you to the Butano library because I know the developer and I've had a lot of great experiences with Butano. You can find it by just going and Googling GitHub Butano. This will take you to its GitHub page. Now, everything on GitHub, you can use the git command to clone onto your system locally. So I'll show you how to do that in just a bit. You can see some examples of programs that were written using Butano. This is a C++ engine, and I've consulted with a few people. This is basically the easiest engine to get started with. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy the link. That's https github.com gvaliente butano, and you're going to want to type in git clone, and then you're going to want to paste in that link. So once you've done that, you've issued that command, it's going to clone into a folder named Butano. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but first we're going to have to do something else. Let's go to the Get Started guide. You're going to want to install a development library called devkitPro. And I'll walk you through the installation. You can install this natively on Windows, but you need to use something like MSys2, and it's not as fast as using WSL, and it's a little bit more convoluted. A lot of these steps, if you're using Xcode for Mac, you can follow them. It's pretty simple to get this whole setup working on Mac. But yeah, you're going to want to install on Linux Pacman, which is another package manager program, sort of like APT, what we typed in earlier. If you're using WSL, you might want to type this command in. This will form a link. You don't exactly need to know everything that does, just that it's important. What we're going to do is I'm going to double check and make sure that I have the wget program installed. There we go. And then we're going to want to copy this command over here. All right. chmod is a command on Linux that enables you to change the permissions of various files. Oftentimes by default, you aren't able to execute just any file that you download from the internet. You have to be a super user and make sure that the system knows that what you are executing is safe. So we will run the chmod command with the +x attribute. What that means is we want to be able to add the executable attribute to these files. Type in this command. And then finally, we will install devkitPro Pacman. Yes. Should take just a moment. And there we go. All right. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to update the databases. This is sort of like when we issued sudo apt update. This is what it's doing, but for the devkitPro Pacman application. So dkp pacman sy, synchronizing all of its databases. Let's see. Let's list some of the packages that we have. There we go. Okay, so we've got a big fat list here. That was, by the way, this command. So we've got, where to get off to? You can do a lot with this, by the way. If you notice the names of all the different game consoles that you can compile code on using this particular library. I'm trying to remember what the name of the... All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm going to install the GBA dev package. Let's see. Pretty sure that's just sgba dev. Let's see. Yeah, you're going to want to install all of these by default. And proceed with the installation. And there we go. One of my favorite things about Linux is the fact that it has lots and lots and lots of different permutations of loading screens that are all in the terminal. They're all very fun to look at. All right, so now that that is installed, one of the commands you're going to want to know for Linux is the ls command. What this does is this lists all of the files in your current working directory. This means the folder that you have open in the terminal. So the folder that I currently am in, because this is the default when you open it for the first time, is home Ethan. CD is a command that allows you to change your current directory. It literally stands for change directory. So when I say I want to change my directory to /home/Ethan, you notice we're in the same directory. So I'll do the clear command to get rid of that. Okay, something I almost forgot to tell you to do, and I had to go back and make sure I included this, is you are going to want to include the devkitPro binaries in your system path. This way, Butano or whatever library you're using whenever you make code for GBA will know where to look. So we do that using the export command. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in export devkitPro equals opt devkitPro. This lets it know that when it looks for the devkitPro variable, it can find it in this particular folder. Now I'm also going to do the same with these two values. Boom. And finally, this value. Now fortunately, because of the installation process, you only need to do this on the first time that you use it. In the future, you won't need to install any of this stuff. It'll already know where everything is. This is just setting up for the first time. Now let's cd into the Butano folder. So you'll notice in this folder, the creator has set up a examples folder and a games folder. Let's go to the games folder because that seems like it might be a more interesting place to do a first compilation. So let's navigate into the Vroom 3D folder. Let's list the files in there. All right, so we see a make file. That means what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to issue the make command. Now keep in mind, if you have multiple cores on your machine, you can take advantage of them using the -J attribute. So for example, I have a 12-core processor, and what this means is I'll include a 12. If you have a dual core, you'll include a 2, quad core, a 4, so on and so on. Now, we're going to wait a little bit. It does not take this long to make after you've done it for the first time. But the first time it usually takes a little bit. Now we have a ROM fixed. If you want to see a file from within your WSL instance, you can do so by going to your File Explorer, and you'll notice it has a little Linux button down here. You'll click on that, go to Debian, and remember, like I mentioned earlier, we are in home Ethan. So then I'll go to Butano, Games, Vroom 3D, and would you look at that? Heck yeah. See, that wasn't too hard. Now, you want to get started with your own program, though. There are some tools you can use, and I'll walk you through a very, very basic example. So, within the examples folder, we can see lots and lots and lots of different programs here. The one I think I'm going to get started with for this particular instance is the one that I personally found to be the most interesting. I'll go to audio, make. Now you don't have to do this complicated command. All this does is clear the screen. The semicolon differentiates between the commands, and then obviously I'm including support for all 12 cores. So I'll give it a little moment to build, and while I'm waiting, I'll go over here. Okay. Let's see, where was I? Oh, there we are. All right, so it's built. Okay, but this song is actually... Okay, it doesn't sound like it right now, but this is actually a pretty dope song. I recommend building this particular example in. listening to the whole thing. It really is impressive for the hardware. Let's close it. Now let's dive right into the code. Now I recommend personally Visual Studio Code. There are lots and lots and lots of great code editors out there. There are some with actually quite a bit of GBA support. I'm going to get into those in a later video, I think, because I don't know them very well. I'm only sharing with you what I know. VS Code is not the same thing as Visual Studio. It is a lightweight code editor that you can install by going to this website. It's very easy to set up. It's got great language support for C++. And so you will see Visual Studio Code open up when I open up this program. All right, so let's just do a very basic walkthrough, because this really isn't a C++ tutorial. This is more of just a tutorial on how to get started with GBA development. So Butano, first and foremost, is under the zlib license. If you make anything with it, you will want to credit the creator and bring a link back to this particular library. There's full instructions on how to do that on his GitHub page. Now, first and foremost, we're going to see the include command. What this is doing is this is telling the preprocessor, the first step of the compilation process, to copy code from the engine and paste it directly into here. And that'll provide you with additional functions and variables, constants that you can take advantage of. That's sort of how most low-level C++ libraries function. So we've got one to support just the core libraries. This one has functions for the keypad. We have the background palettes, music, obviously. So we'll dive just headfirst into the first function. Now, I personally do not take advantage of namespaces in my own code, but a lot of people do. They really are a powerful C++ feature. But you can essentially run this program without it. So right here we have our first function. This is a void function, which means that you can call the function and it doesn't expect anything to be returned. I want to say the thing that we're passing to this function is a variable of type sprite text generator. Now this is within the Butano namespace, and you can tell because it begins with this bn here, and it is a pointer because we are passing in the address. Now the text generator is a custom, I believe it's a class, that has quite a few features that you might need for putting text on the screen. Honestly, I just recommend playing with these examples, diving in, tweaking the code, making modifications of it. That's how I learned C++. Like, I didn't even take a C++ tutorial. I just dove into these and started messing with things. But you'll see we have a constant expression here that has multiple different lines of text. We have this right here is a music item type that gets populated during compilation that includes links to your music. And then this is the main game loop. If you are familiar with using Blitz Basic or other, I want to say, more rudimentary game-making tools, you'll be familiar with the concept of a main loop. Now, a lot of object-oriented systems like Unity have done away with this for the most part, but if you're more familiar with that type of game development, this will seem very cozy to you. So we've got a while not keypad start pressed, and then here are different functions that handle what happens when you push different buttons. Now, I could talk all day about what everything in this program does, but I'm just going to go ahead and refer you to the Butano documentation. Now, this documentation is excellent. I mean, this is one of the best documentation that I've ever seen. You can jump straight into understanding all sorts of different stuff. Like, we'll dive into music here. It'll give you descriptions of what the functions do, what types they can accept. it really is amazing. I do recommend, once you have C++ under your belt a little bit, diving into this documentation and just digging deep into understanding what you can do with this powerful, powerful library. Now, another thing you're going to want to understand is the way that Butano typically by default sets up its folder structures. Now, this is going to get into the more generic side of Game Boy Advance development. If you haven't seen any videos on how the Game Boy Advance does music or graphics, I highly recommend checking those out, because you will run into and become deeply acquainted with the limitations of this system. For example, it only has 128 sprites you can have on screen at any time. Another thing is that your maximum file size is essentially limited to 16 megabytes. So don't expect to have, fully fleshed out dialogue in the game. Audio clippets will be fine, especially if they're compressed. Now we'll see we have some WAV files here. This is a .mod. If you want to play around with .mod files, I recommend using OpenMPT. However, I've also had a lot of good experiences using Milky Tracker, which is another program for editing these particular types of files. They're a lot like MIDI files, but they usually incorporate sample sounds in the files themselves. Let's see if I can get this to open. So what you're seeing is that most of this is programmatic, and that saves a lot of space on the cartridge. If you are not familiar with music trackers, they are a fascinating rabbit hole to dive down into. I highly recommend doing so. Now finally, let's get over to the graphics. Now you're going to want to use a tool like GIMP. See if I can get this pulled up. All right, so we've got GIMP over here. I'm going to zoom in. One thing that you're going to want to know is that the Game Boy Advance only has a palette size of about 16 colors per sprite. So once you have made your image, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set up the file as being indexed. Now I'll take it back to RGB and show you what that screen looks like. I have it set up to generate an optimum palette of about 15, and you will occasionally want to use color dithering, but sometimes it ends up making it look worse, so I'm just going to have that turned off. And then finally, once you're done editing this file, you're going to want to... So all sprites for Game Boy Advance have to be in multiples of 2, so 8, 16, 32, 64. Those are the maximum size for the sprites that you're going to want to be dealing with. Additionally, let's go to transparency. Actually, let's go to where to get off to. There we go. Color map, rearrange color map. The first color in this list is going to be your transparency color. So you're going to want to make sure that you rearrange this such that the screen color, which is obviously your background, is placed at the beginning. And then once you're done, and this is a very important step, when you're exporting this file, you will want to make sure that you are turning on do not write color space information. Once that's done, we can be able to work with our object, or our image thing. I can't English today. Anyway, so that is this is a 30-minute summary. There's obviously, you can dive into this thing for months, but this is a very upper level summary of the kind of stuff that you need to be able to know, and that you will need to be able to use if you want to code for GBA. With that said, as I mentioned earlier, there are links in the description. You can go to the Game Boy Advance Discord server, and we would love to help you out. Additionally, ask any question you want in the comments. I've been doing this stuff for like a year, so I'm pretty well versed. I'm not an expert, but I know what I'm talking about. With that said, I hope you guys have a great day, and good luck.